Hello and welcome to Boring History for Sleep. Tonight, we consider a quiet revolution that took place not on a battlefield, but in the American kitchen drawer. Imagine for a moment a modern recipe with its precise instructions: 1/2 cup of flour, sifted, 1/4 teaspoon of salt. We take for granted that the cup in your kitchen holds the same volume as the cup in mine, that our teaspoons measure out an identical quantity of leavening. This shared language of measurement is the silent foundation of modern home baking. But it was not always so. For generations, the kitchen was a realm of approximation, of recipes that spoke in riddles: a knob of butter the size of a walnut, a teacup full of milk, a pinch of spice. To understand how we arrived at this quiet certainty, we must travel back to a time when every kitchen cupboard held a different truth, and explore the slow, deliberate, and incremental journey toward a common measure. To truly appreciate the standardization of kitchen measurements, we must first immerse ourselves in the culinary landscape of the late 19th century, a world operating on a foundation of experience, intuition, and highly variable tools. Before the 1880s, the concept of a universally accepted, precise measuring tool for the home cook was largely non-existent. Recipes, when they were written down at all, were more akin to suggestions or aide-memoirs for the experienced cook than they were prescriptive, scientific formulas. They relied on a vocabulary of ambiguity. A recipe might call for a gill of molasses, a teacup of sugar, or a wineglass of brandy. These were not standardized units, but rather references to common household objects. The problem, of course, was that the teacup in a wealthy Boston home, likely a delicate piece of imported porcelain, held a very different volume from the sturdy ceramic mug used in a rural farmhouse in Ohio. A wineglass could vary dramatically in size and shape depending on its vintage and maker. Even the common tablespoon and teaspoon were not uniform. They were simply the largest and smallest spoons in a family's set of flatware, their capacities dictated by fashion and silversmith rather than by a metrological standard. This system of measurement, or lack thereof, created a culinary culture deeply reliant on personal judgment. The success of a cake or a loaf of bread depended on the cook's feel for the dough, her ability to judge its consistency by sight and touch. She knew from years of practice what a properly hydrated dough looked like, how a batter should pour. Recipes were often passed down orally from mother to daughter, with the crucial, unwritten knowledge of what a heaping spoonful truly meant in the context of their specific spoons and their local flour's humidity. A scant cup was another common instruction, requiring the cook to eyeball a measure that was just shy of the brim, an inherently subjective action. Flour was often measured by the pound, or simply scooped directly from the barrel, its density varying with how tightly it was packed. Butter was measured by weight or by approximations of volume, like the ubiquitous lump the size of an egg or the size of a walnut. These were organic, agricultural comparisons that made sense in their time, but were wildly inconsistent. Was it a bantam egg or a large hen's egg? A black walnut or an English walnut? The answers were assumed, not specified. This lack of precision meant that reproducing a dish with consistent results was a significant challenge, especially for a novice cook or someone trying a recipe from a different region. A recipe from a New England cookbook might fail spectacularly in the South, not because the ingredients were wrong, but because the assumed volume of a coffee cup was entirely different. This environment fostered a certain mystique around good cooking. It was considered an art, a form of alchemy, rather than a science. Those who could produce reliable results were seen as possessing a special talent, an innate gift, rather than simply following a reliable process. The kitchen was a domain of analogy and approximation, a stark contrast to the increasing precision being demanded in the worlds of industry, science, and commerce during the same period. The Industrial Revolution was built on interchangeable parts and standardized gauges, yet the American home kitchen, the very heart of domestic life, remained a bastion of imprecise tradition. The first significant stirrings of change began to emerge from an intellectual and social movement that sought to apply scientific principles to the domestic sphere, the rise of domestic science, later known as home economics. This movement, gaining traction in the latter half of the 19th century, argued that tasks like cooking, cleaning, and household management could be made more efficient, healthful, and predictable through rational, systematic methods. Proponents believed that running a home should be treated with the same seriousness and rigor as running a laboratory or a factory. Central to this philosophy was the idea of control and predictability in cooking, and that could only be achieved through accurate measurement. At the forefront of this movement was the Boston Cooking School, founded in 1879. The school's mission was to provide formal instruction in the culinary arts, moving cooking away from rote memorization and intuition toward a more educational, principles-based approach. While several principles led the school in its early years, it was its fourth principle, Fanny Merritt Farmer, who would become the single most important figure in the standardization of American kitchen measures. Farmer, who took the helm in 1891, was not just an excellent cook. She was a methodical and passionate educator. She suffered a paralytic illness in her teens that left her with a permanent limp, preventing her from finishing high school or pursuing a more traditional career. Instead, she poured her formidable intellect and organizational skills into the world of cooking. Fanny Farmer's core conviction was that cooking could be accessible to anyone, regardless of their prior experience, if they were given clear, precise, and reliable instructions. She saw the ambiguity of old recipes as a barrier to entry, a source of frustration and wasted ingredients. Her revolutionary contribution, the one that would echo through American kitchens for the next century, was her unwavering insistence on level measurements. This simple but profound concept was a direct assault on the vague world of heaping, scant, and rounded. Farmer taught her students to fill a measuring cup or spoon with a dry ingredient, such as flour or sugar, and then to use the straight edge of a knife to sweep across the top, leveling it off. This created a consistent, repeatable volume of the ingredient every single time. It removed the guesswork and transformed the act of measuring from a subjective judgment into an objective, mechanical process. In 1896, Fanny Farmer compiled her teachings and recipes into a cookbook, published at her own expense after several publishers rejected it. It was titled The Boston Cooking School Cookbook. This book would become one of the most influential and best-selling cookbooks in American history, often known simply as the Fanny Farmer Cookbook. Its introduction laid out her philosophy with clarity and purpose. She explained the importance of exact measurements and provided tables of weights and measures. Her recipes were written in a new, clear format, with a list of ingredients and their precise quantities presented first, followed by a step-by-step method for combining them. For the first time, a popular cookbook told the home cook to use half teaspoon of baking soda, not a pinch, and 1 cup of sugar, not a teacupful. The immediate success of Farmer's book created a demand for the very tools her methods required. While she had standardized the process of measuring, the implements themselves were still not truly standard. However, her book's popularity spurred manufacturers to begin producing and marketing sets of measuring cups and spoons designed specifically for this new, scientific style of cooking. Early versions were often made of tin or graniteware. A typical set of spoons might include a tablespoon, a teaspoon, a half teaspoon, and a quarter teaspoon. The cups were often sold as a single 1-cup measure with gradations marked on the side for 1/4, 1/3, and 1/2 cup, or as a nested set of individual cups for each of those fractions. These early tools were a crucial first step. They were marketed as standard or accurate measures, often sold alongside copies of the cookbook. For the first time, a home cook could purchase a set of implements designed from the ground up for the sole purpose of measuring, rather than repurposing tableware. However, a critical distinction must be made. While these new tools were a vast improvement over teacups and soup spoons, there was not yet a single, overarching standard that all manufacturers adhered to. One company's standard 1-cup measure might be a few milliliters different from another's. The definitions were still somewhat fluid and were often based on the publisher's or manufacturer's own internal logic, rather than a national or federal standard. For instance, the cup was generally understood to be equivalent to a half pint, but the precise definition of a pint could still vary, Despite this lingering inconsistency between brands, the crucial development was the establishment of consistency within a single household. A cook who used the same set of nested cups and matched spoons for every recipe from her Fanny Farmer cookbook could now achieve remarkably consistent results, time after time. The revolution had begun not with a single government-mandated standard, but with the widespread adoption of a standardized methodology and the commercial availability of tools that enabled it. Fanny Farmer had given the American home cook a system, and industry was beginning to provide the hardware to make that system work. The dawn of the 20th century saw the principles of domestic science and standardized measurement expand from the influential but relatively small world of cooking schools into the mainstream of American culture. This expansion was driven by a confluence of powerful forces: the maturation of the American manufacturing industry, the rise of mass media and advertising, and the formalization of home economics as an academic discipline taught in schools and universities across the country. Manufacturers of housewares were quick to capitalize on the growing demand for kitchen tools that promised accuracy and efficiency. The late 19th century had seen the production of simple tin and graniteware measuring cups, but the new century brought new materials and new production techniques. Aluminum, in particular, became a popular material for kitchen goods after the turn of the century. It was lightweight, rust-proof, and had a clean, modern appearance that appealed to the progressive sensibilities of the era. Companies like the Aluminum Goods Manufacturing Company of Manitowoc, Wisconsin, which would later become famous for its Miro brand, began mass-producing sets of nested measuring cups and spoons. These were no longer niche items for aspiring gourmands. They were marketed as essential tools for every modern housewife. Advertisements in popular magazines like Good Housekeeping and the Ladies' Home Journal extolled the virtues of these new aluminum sets, promising that they would banish baking failures and ensure domestic harmony. The very act of selling these items as a set, typically 1 cup, half cup, third cup, and quarter cup measures, along with a corresponding set of spoons, helped to solidify in the public mind what the standard fractions were. Simultaneously, a parallel and even more influential force was at work: the rise of branded, packaged food products. Companies like Procter & Gamble, with its Crisco shortening, the Washburn-Crosby Company, with its Gold Medal flour, and the Royal Baking Powder Company were all vying for customer loyalty. Their business models depended on consumers having a positive and, crucially, a repeatable experience with their products. A baker's failure with a cake made from Gold Medal flour was a failure for the brand. To ensure success, these companies invested heavily in developing and testing recipes in their own corporate test kitchens. These recipes, printed on packaging, in pamphlets, and in advertisements, were meticulously formulated. And they all relied on the assumption of standardized, level measurements. These corporate kitchens became powerful, if unofficial, agents of standardization. They had a vested financial interest in promoting the use of accurate measuring cups and spoons. A recipe for a Crisco pie crust that called for half cup of Crisco would only work reliably if the consumer's half-cup measure was the same as the one used in the test kitchen. Consequently, food company advertising began to actively educate consumers on the principles of level measurement that Fanny Farmer had pioneered. They often offered their own branded measuring sets as premiums, either for free with a certain number of proofs of purchase or for a nominal fee. A set of Royal Baking Powder spoons or a Crisco measuring cup carried an implicit guarantee of accuracy, at least in the context of that company's recipes. While this created a landscape where multiple standards coexisted, the Crisco standard, the Gold Medal standard, the overall effect was a massive public education campaign that pushed the American home cook ever closer to a single, shared system of measurement. The language of cups and teaspoons became the lingua franca of the American recipe. This push was further amplified by the educational system. Home economics programs, inspired by the domestic science movement, became a standard part of the curriculum in high schools and land-grant universities. A generation of young women was now being formally taught the scientific way to cook. In classroom kitchens across the country, They learned to level their flour with a knife, to measure liquids at eye level, and to use a standard set of measuring cups and spoons. These programs institutionalized the Fanny Farmer method, turning what had been a revolutionary idea into standard practice. When these students graduated and set up their own homes, they took with them the expectation of precision and the tools required to achieve it. This created a powerful feedback loop. Schools created demand for standardized tools, and manufacturers supplied them, which in turn made it easier for schools to teach the standardized methods. Despite this enormous progress in practice and public consciousness, there was still no single, federally mandated, or industry-wide official standard for the capacity of a cup or a teaspoon. The U.S. Bureau of Standards, established in 1901 and later renamed the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, was primarily concerned with weights and measures for commerce, science, and industry. Its focus was on ensuring that a pound of flour at the grocer's was truly a pound, or that a gallon of gasoline at the pump was truly a gallon. The contents of a kitchen drawer were considered outside its purview. The existing legal definitions revolved around units like the gallon, quart, and pint. The cup was commonly understood to be half a liquid pint, which would make it 8 fluid ounces. However, this was a customary definition, a convention, not a legally enforced standard for cookware manufacturing. As a result, minor variations between manufacturers persisted through the 1910s and 1920s. Most were close enough to the 8-ounce standard for recipes to work, but the system still lacked the absolute scientific precision that its proponents espoused. The foundation had been laid, the public had been educated, and the tools were widely available, but the final authoritative capstone of a single, universally accepted standard had yet to be put in place. The period between the 1930s and the end of World War II marked a critical phase in the final push towards true standardization, a time when broad economic and social pressures reinforced the need for precision in the American kitchen. The Great Depression, beginning in 1929, brought an era of unprecedented economic hardship. For millions of families, thrift and the elimination of waste were not just virtues but necessities for survival. This new reality placed a premium on recipes that were reliable and economical. Every failed cake, every loaf of bread that didn't rise, was a costly waste of precious ingredients. The scientific cooking methods promoted by home economists, with their emphasis on exact measurements, were no longer just a matter of modern convenience, but a vital tool for household budget management. A recipe that could be trusted to work every time helped a homemaker stretch her food dollars as far as possible. Government agencies and home economics extension services redoubled their efforts to educate the public on efficient kitchen practices, and central to this education was the use of standard measuring tools. This trend was dramatically accelerated with the entry of the United States into World War II in 1941. The war effort required a massive mobilization of the home front, and food was a critical component of this. The federal government instituted a system of rationing for essential goods like sugar, butter, meat, and canned goods. The Office of Price Administration issued ration books with stamps that limited the amount of these items a family could purchase. In this environment, precision in the kitchen became a patriotic duty. Wasting food was not just a personal loss, it was seen as undermining the war effort. Government-issued pamphlets and magazines were filled with advice for wartime cooking. These publications provided recipes designed to make the most of rationed ingredients, substituting more plentiful items for scarce ones, and ensuring that nothing was wasted. All of these recipes were predicated on the use of standard measuring cups and spoons. A wartime recipe for a sugarless cake that called for 1/3 cup of honey had to work reliably, and that required the homemaker to have a 1/3 cup measure that was accurate. The shared national experience of rationing created a powerful, unifying force for the adoption of a common measurement system. It was also during this period that professional organizations began to take a more active role in formalizing the standards that had been developing organically for decades. The American Home Economics Association, AHEA, a professional organization of home economists, became a key player in this process. Its members, working in academia, industry, and government, recognized the need for an official, industry-wide standard to eliminate the remaining inconsistencies between different manufacturers' products. In collaboration with the American Standards Association, ASA, the precursor to the American National Standards Institute, ANSI, the AEA began the painstaking work of developing formal, written standards for household cooking utensils. This was a slow, bureaucratic process involving the formation of committees, the conducting of surveys, and extensive negotiations between home economists, consumer groups, and manufacturers. The goal was to arrive at a set of definitions that were scientifically sound, practical for the consumer, and economically feasible for the industry to adopt. One of the key issues they tackled was the formal definition of the cup. While the customary 8 fluid ounce standard was widely accepted, the committees worked to codify it. They defined the standard US cup as a volume of 236.588 milliliters. This high degree of precision was more for the benefit of the tool and die makers at the manufacturing plants than for the home cook, but it ensured that every cup made to the new standard would be virtually identical. The committees also addressed the subtle but important distinction between measuring dry and liquid ingredients. They recommended the use of nested, fractional cups for dry ingredients, as these could be easily leveled off with a straight edge for maximum accuracy. For liquids, they promoted the use of a single larger glass or plastic cup with a pouring spout and headspace above the top measurement line. This design prevented spills when measuring a full cup of milk or water and allowed the cook to view the measurement at eye level to accurately see the bottom of the meniscus. This formal distinction in the recommended types of cups for different ingredients was a new level of sophistication, a further step in the scientific rationalization of the kitchen. For measuring spoons, the standards were defined in relation to the tablespoon. The tablespoon was formally defined as being equal to 1/16 of a cup, or 1/2 of a fluid ounce, approximately 14.8 milliliters. From this cornerstone, the other spoons were defined by simple fractions. The teaspoon was 1/3 of a tablespoon, the half teaspoon was 1/6 of a tablespoon, and the quarter teaspoon was 1/12 of a tablespoon. This created a clear, mathematically coherent system that was easy to scale up or down. The familiar set of 1/4 teasp, half teasp, 1 teasp, and 1 tbsp became the codified standard. The adoption of these formal standards by the ASA was not legally binding in the way a federal law would be. Manufacturers were not required to comply. However, the standards carried the significant weight of the AEA and the broader home economics community. Companies that adhered to the ASA standards could market their products as standard or AEA approved, which became a powerful mark of quality and reliability for consumers. In the post-war economic boom, as millions of new families set up households, they sought out modern, reliable kitchen equipment. A set of standardized measuring cups and spoons, often made from shiny new materials like stainless steel or colorful, durable plastics like Melmac, became an essential purchase for the well-equipped suburban kitchen. The quiet, incremental work of the standards committees, combined with the powerful social and economic forces of the preceding decades, had finally resulted in a truly unified and universally understood system of measurement for the American home. The post-World War II era, from the late 1940s through the 1960s, represents the final solidification and widespread, unchallenged adoption of the standardized kitchen measurement system in the United States. The groundwork had been laid, the standards had been formalized, and now, during a period of unprecedented prosperity and consumerism, these standards became deeply embedded in the material culture of the American home. The post-war housing boom, fueled by the GI Bill and the growth of the suburbs, led to the construction of millions of new homes, each with a modern kitchen at its center. The kitchen was no longer just a utilitarian workspace. It was a symbol of middle-class success and technological progress. Appliance manufacturers and kitchenware companies marketed the idea of the dream kitchen, a space that was not only beautiful, but also supremely efficient. This ideal of efficiency was built upon the principles of order, rationality, and precision, that the domestic science movement had championed for half a century. A complete matching set of standardized measuring cups and spoons was no longer just a tool, but a necessary component of this modern domestic ideal. They were sold as part of comprehensive kitchen starter sets, given as wedding gifts, and featured prominently in the burgeoning world of television advertising, which depicted happy, successful homemakers effortlessly preparing perfect meals for their families. The materials used to produce these tools reflected the technological optimism of the age. While aluminum remained popular for its low cost, stainless steel became a preferred material for higher-end sets, prized for its durability, resistance to staining, and sleek, professional appearance. The plastics industry, which had advanced rapidly during the war, also made its way into the kitchen drawer. Companies like Earl S. Tupper's Tupperware brand, founded in 1946, and Pyrex, with its heat-resistant glass, began producing their own iconic lines of measuring cups. The clear glass of a Pyrex measuring cup, with its bright red markings, became a fixture in American kitchens, perfectly embodying the scientific approach to liquid measurement that the standards committees had advocated. Its transparency allowed for easy, accurate reading, and its durability meant it could be used for both hot and cold liquids. The very ubiquity of these products from major trusted brands like Pyrex, Miro, and Foley further cemented the standard. A cup was an 8-ounce cup because the Pyrex cup everyone owned was an 8-ounce cup. The publishing industry also played a crucial role in this final stage of consolidation. The mid-20th century was a golden age for the cookbook. Betty Crocker's Picture Cookbook, first published in 1950, and the ongoing revisions of classics like The Joy of Cooking and the Fanny Farmer Cookbook sold millions of copies. These books were the Bibles of the post-war kitchen, and they all spoke the same unambiguous language of standardized measures. They assumed, without question, that their readers owned and used a standard set of cups and spoons. Recipe contests like the famous Pillsbury Bake Off, which began in 1949, also reinforced this universal language. To enter, a home baker had to submit a recipe with precise, clear instructions that could be replicated by judges and later by the public. The entire ecosystem of food media, from women's magazines to the first television cooking shows featuring personalities like James Beard and Julia Child, operated on the shared foundation of these now commonplace standards. During the 1960s, a new conversation began to emerge that would, in a way, test the strength of the established American system, the debate over metrication. As global trade and scientific collaboration increased, there was a growing movement in the United States to abandon its customary system of inches, pounds, and ounces in favor of the metric system used by most of the rest of the world. The Metric Conversion Act of 1975 would later designate the metric system as the preferred system of weights and measures for United States trade and commerce, but its adoption by the general public, particularly in the kitchen, was slow and incomplete. This debate, however, did have an effect on kitchen measurements. It prompted a renewed look at the precise definitions of the existing U.S. customary units. Cookbooks and measuring cup manufacturers began to include metric equivalents alongside the traditional cup and ounce markings. A 1-cup measure might now be marked with 8 oz and also to 37 milliliter, often rounded from the more precise 236.588. This dual marking system was an acknowledgement of a wider world of measurement, but it also served to reinforce the precise definition of the American standard. In order to provide an accurate metric equivalent, manufacturers had to be more rigorous than ever about adhering to the established US standard. The cup was not just a cup, it was definitively 236.588 milliliters. The process of considering a new system had the paradoxical effect of strengthening the precision of the old one. By 1970, the end of our period of study, the process of standardization was complete. The journey that had begun in the 1880s with the frustrations of inconsistent teacups had reached its destination. A home cook could now walk into any department store, hardware store, or supermarket in the United States and buy a set of measuring spoons or cups with full confidence that they would be functionally identical to any other set sold in the country. They could pick up a cookbook from any publisher, use a recipe from any magazine, and follow it with the assurance that their cup of flour was the same as the author's. This quiet, 90-year evolution was not the result of a single invention or a single government decree. It was a slow, incremental convergence, driven by a diverse cast of characters and forces. It was driven by pioneering educators like Fanny Farmer, who believed in a rational, accessible approach to cooking. It was pushed forward by large corporations that saw standardization as a way to guarantee the quality of their products and build brand loyalty. It was nurtured by the professional organizations of home economists who dedicated themselves to the painstaking, bureaucratic work of defining standards. It was reinforced by the profound societal pressures of economic depression and World War, which made precision and efficiency matters of national importance. And finally, it was solidified by the post-war consumer culture that made the tools of this new, precise way of cooking a standard feature of every American home. The result was a profound, but often unnoticed, transformation. The standardization of measurement democratized cooking, removing the mystique and making it an accessible skill for millions of novices. It allowed for the creation of a truly national culinary literature, where recipes could be shared and replicated across vast distances with reliable results. It changed the very nature of the recipe itself, transforming it from a vague suggestion into a predictable, scientific formula. The well-ordered kitchen drawer, with its nested set of cups and its ring of spoons, each with its capacity clearly stamped into the metal or plastic, stands as a silent testament to this long, slow, and thoroughly boring revolution. A revolution not of dramatic upheaval, but of the gradual, steady, and relentless imposition of order upon chaos. It is a quiet history, but one that is baked into nearly every cake, every cookie, and every loaf of bread that comes out of the American kitchen. And so as we settle in, we can reflect on this peaceful order, this gentle certainty, a system so successful that it has become entirely invisible, a quiet foundation upon which we cook, and a calm, predictable thought to accompany us as we drift towards sleep.